Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Hi, lovely listeners. I hope you're having a wonderful festive period in whatever form it takes for you. I'm recording this on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas Day, and thanks to negative lateral flow tests, I've been able to have a lovely Christmas with my immediate family and a couple of close friends. So this intro is going to massively date this episode, but there we go. Here in the UK, the number of COVID cases is currently skyrocketing, so we're all kind of on tenterhooks waiting to see what restrictions are about to be put in place after the immediate Christmas celebrations. So that's kind of at the forefront of my mind at the moment. I hope that you're staying safe and well wherever you are. So let's take our minds off of COVID for a while and move on to matters of sewing and sustainability. If you were trying to get some gift sewing done, I hope you achieved it without any undue stress. I've managed to get my son's upcycled denim dungarees finished, apart from the final press studs that I'll attach when he tries them on. I can't wait to see him in them. Although I've made them a size too big to get maximum use from them, so he might be wearing them with massive turn-ups for a while. I also got a couple of dolls' dresses done for my daughter's present, which are made from scraps of jersey. They look really cute and came together mercifully quickly after the very involved dungarees project. I'll post about the dresses on my blog Sozo What Do You Know in January for my free Pattern Friday post for the month. With those complete, I can get back to my own dungarees project now. For those, I'm using the Greta pattern by Made My Wardrobe, and I'm adding a front bib pocket for a more utilitarian look. I'm making them from some curtains that I bought from a charity shop, and I'm so excited to have them in my wardrobe. Oh my goodness, sustainability-wise, I think the week of Christmas has got to be one of the trickiest in terms of staying on track with sustainability goals. Regarding the product swaps I bought the other week, so far I can report that I'm enjoying using the plastic-free salt block deodorant. It's very simple to use, you just wet it and rub it in your armpits, and I can tell it's going to last for yonks. But because it's currently winter and because I've been feeling a bit under the weather, so I haven't been out for a run for ages, I can't say how well it actually functions in relation to sweat. So I've got to get back to you on that one. The plastic-free dental floss that I also bought recently definitely gets a resounding thumbs up. It's made by a company called The Humble Co., but I'm sure there's others available. So the box that it comes in is also the dispenser. When you open up the top flap, you reveal a tiny little metal lip that helps you cut off the length that you need, and it works really well. The kids' bamboo toothbrush that I bought as well seems to be a hit with my daughter. The fact that it has a picture of a koala on has helped, I think. It's actually smaller than I thought it would be from looking at the box, so I'm going to get one for my 5-year-old son also when his plastic ones are used up. Other than that, I'm just trying to work on preventing food waste as much as possible, which of course is particularly bad around this time of year. We all tend to overbuy food around Christmas, and any meal planning efforts tend to go out the window, don't they? I heard a statistic a couple of years ago that says if food waste was a country, it'd be the third largest in terms of greenhouse emissions. And in developed countries, households are responsible for up to 50% of all food waste. So focusing on eating up all the food we buy is something we've got direct control over, and it could have a big impact on global warming. Well, the podcast has had a lovely Christmas present this week, or rather 6 presents, in the form of awesome new patrons of the podcast. Massive thanks to Mary, Deborah, Heinarangi, Kat, Stacey and Betty for signing up to support Check Your Thread each month. This ad-free podcast could not get made without the amazing patrons, so big thanks to all of you. If you are also in a position to support the podcast and keep it rolling, you can sign up for whatever amount you feel you are able to contribute each month. All amounts help enormously. Please find out how to do so via the link in the show notes, on the website checkyourthread.com, or by visiting patreon.com/checkyourthread. Thank you. Let's get on with today's episode. This one is a first for Check Your Thread. It's a conversation involving 3 people. Subsequently, it's a meatier, longer episode than others. I thought it would make sense to drop it this week when a lot of people will be spending time at home or perhaps on long car journeys, so enjoying a longer episode might be more possible. So thankfully, the tech held up for this 3-person transatlantic chat, and I had the pleasure of talking to 2 wonderful women based in different locations in Chicago. Carla Bruni is, among other things, the founder and organiser of Community Glue workshops, which are regular, free mending events which have been taking place for almost a decade. And Megan Grandstaff is one of the talented and dedicated volunteers who specialises in fixing clothing and textile items. It was fascinating to learn the origin story of Community Glue workshops. You'll hear about the nuts and bolts of how the events work, including considerations for both visitors and volunteers, and how to prepare the space, tools and materials. If you're interested in setting up a mending workshop of some description yourself, this is essential listening because they share so many tips that have helped them make theirs so successful. What I also loved about the conversation was the other directions it took. And we found ourselves discussing matters of sustainability and mending more broadly. For example, Carla went into the importance of why reusing and repair must always trump upcycling and recycling. Meg told us about how she became a professional mender, her regular impromptu mending workshops where she taught her friends and colleagues how to mend their own clothing, and she spoke about how she continues to develop and actively grow her already impressive skill set. Both Carla and Meg are incredibly intelligent and experienced people, and I'm so grateful for them for sharing their time and mental energy with me for the podcast. I really hope you enjoy this final conversation for the podcast in 2021. Okay, let's go! Hello, Meg and Carla. I'm so thrilled that you've agreed to have this conversation with me. Welcome to Check Your Thread.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you.
So I'm thrilled that we've managed to make a 3-person conversation via international means work. So thank you. Okay, so can we start by getting to know you both a little bit? So it'd be cool if you could introduce yourself by telling us who you are, where you are, and what fills most of your days. So Meg, are you happy to go first?
Sure. Hi, my name is Megan Grandstaff. On Instagram, you'll find me as Meg the Grant. I live here in Chicago. I'm part of our Community Glue Repair Clinic, SOIS contingent, which we're talking about today. And I spend a lot of my days plotting, crafting. That's the majority of my days, always making plans and getting some crafting done.
Awesome. Carla, you, please.
My name is Carla Bruni. I live in Chicago. So my background is actually historic preservation. So like architectural preservation, cultural heritage work. So I work for a nonprofit here in the city, and I teach in the historic preservation department at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago as well.
Oh my goodness.
And then I have, any number of random projects as well.
So you're both involved in a fascinating sounding endeavour called Community Glue Workshop, we've already mentioned, and that's based in Chicago in the US. So Carla, you set up the initiative in 2012, and Meg, you're one of the volunteers who help fix the items that the public bring in. So I'd love to hear a bit more about both of you, though, before we dig in more into the workings of the Community Glue Workshops themselves. So Carla, can you tell me a bit more about your background, particularly as it relates to sustainability and repair?
Sure. There's a lot of reasons why people do historic preservation work. It's basically usually just trying to save buildings and spaces, and also histories and whatnot. But it's very architecturally focused, especially in the US, I think. So one of the main reasons why I wanted to do that work was because, we're tearing buildings down all the time and we're throwing them into landfills. We are really, really bad about that, especially in Chicago. So
I haven't been to Chicago, sadly. I'd love to. But my best friend has, and she says that the buildings are incredible, that it just is a really beautiful, very, very cool city.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. I could get into the weeds with you, but I won't.
Okay.
Not on this
podcast. Next time. So Meg, I've known you via the internet for many years, specifically the online sewing community. But I've only recently found out about your sewing history. So could you please tell the listeners how you got into sewing and mending, please?
Sure. So a bit of background. I got an acting scholarship in college, which was wonderful. Loved it. But it so happened that one year I wasn't cast in any of the main stage shows, and I had to work off that scholarship. So I had an option of going into the costume shop or the scene shop, and they decided I was going to go in the costume shop. And I'd grown up around sewing machines. My grandmother sewed, my mother sewed, but they never taught me. So this was my first time learning. And basically what happens is when you go into the costume shop, they sit you down with a sampler, and it's just a basic piece of muslin that's folded over twice on the edges. And you have to complete this before you're allowed to touch a machine. And then you have to do a machine sampler. And the basic sampler for hand sewing was you had to do the blind stitch, the catch stitch. You had to sew whopper poppers, which are the big snaps. We always call them whopper poppers.
I love that. I've got whopper poppers on my coat.
They're so great. We had to do like hook and eyes, hook and bars, and then we had to do the 3 buttons, which is 2-hole, 4-hole, and shank. So you had to complete that. And then when you got done with that, you had to go to the machine and do a machine sampler, which is you had to write your name in cursive.
Oh,
and
my
then follow
goodness.
your name in cursive with the sewing machine in order to be able to work on anything.
I'm not sure I could do that now.
I don't know if I could do it now. I haven't practiced, but I did okay. I did well enough that they were like, okay, you can hem some skirts. So that was my starting learning how to actually sew.
Yeah.
And as time went on, I got cast in shows. So I was both being on stage and also working in the costume shop behind the scenes because I got hired into the costume shop as an employee, which was great. So then I'm doing a lot of my own costumes and working on them, being like, oh, God, Megan, why do you have to have such long legs? And like letting out hems and taking the hems back up again. That was a lot of fun. And eventually I got the opportunity to be the costume crew head, which is basically the head of wardrobe for some of our bigger shows.
Wow.
Like How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, or Children of Eden, things where there were a lot of costumes for a lot of people. And so at the end of the night, you have a lot of laundry to do. So it would be me and some other of the costume crew folks would come back to the costume shop. We would sit there. We'd be doing repairs, so a lot of mending, and doing the laundry into the wee hours of the morning while we were doing our homework. That was a lot of mending there. So that's a big part of my mending background. And then after I graduated, I actually immediately came back for a master's and ended up being really costume focused. I ended up costume designing a show, but also teaching the costuming class, which was really fantastic. I got to teach some other students, including some of my friends, which was an interesting endeavor, how to make button-down shirts and also do samplers and things of that nature. And then eventually when I moved here to Chicago, I overheard some friends laughing that I don't know how to sew a button. And I was like, no, we're
not on my watch.
I cannot stand. So I started hosting sewing parties where I taught people how to sew using the exact sampler methods that I had. So sitting everybody down, and usually I fed them first, to entice them to come in the door and get comfortable. Usually make a huge pot of chili and be like, okay, everybody have a bowl of chili? Great. Now we're going to sew.
And I've got you here.
And I've got you here. And so teaching a lot of folks just how to mend basic things. Often I would encourage them to bring things that needed mending. Like, if you bring your pants, I will teach you how to hem them. I'm not going to hem them for you. I will teach you how to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, with coworkers, with book clubs, I would be like, you should come over so I can teach you how to do a sampler. Like,
amazing. That's so interesting because a lot of people in the online sewing community, they start with sewing and then mending is something that ends up happening. You almost did it the other way around in a way, didn't you?
Right. I learned how to mend. So when it came time and I was like, I want to learn how to make my own clothes, I was very nervous about sewing for myself. I didn't start sewing for myself until probably about 10 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. So, and that was part of like the Sew Weekly sewing challenges that would come up, be like, you have a week to make this garment. And I was like, sure, this sounds great. I had never made anything for myself before that. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you. Right. Let's get stuck in. Carla, can you please tell me the origin story of Community Glue workshops and what happened back in 2012?
Yeah. So I had a fellowship at the time. It was this group of like young progressives, and everyone was really serious, and it was all people who were sort of entrepreneurial or politically sort of inclined, and we all had to come up with some sort of a final project. But I was also doing historic preservation work at the time. I finished grad school in like 2008. God, I'm old. And one of the things that was pretty obvious to me was like, well, we don't know how to use tools anymore. Like, it's intimidating I want to be like, I can't believe you're not buying this old, Queen Anne, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's a lot of work. I mean, it is a ton of work to maintain an old house. It just is. I love them. It's great. But like, people are working like 8 billion hours a week and they've got family or they've got a lot of things going on. You know what I mean? Like not everybody has time for that. And if you already don't know how to use a tool, like I have friends who like literally are like, Carla, can you come over and like drill something into my wall? Like they don't even know how to use a drill, you know? Yeah. So I grew up kind of like a tomboy and doing stuff with my dad. So to me, it's a little more comfortable, but I realized like that's a real barrier, like, So if we expect people to, buy these old houses and fix them up, like maybe we should start with like, a cheap toaster, and just show people that you can open things up and actually tinker with them and have some control over it. And it's really not that hard. And so that was, and I read an article in the New York Times around the same time, in 2012, I think it was, that a woman in Amsterdam had started these repair cafes. Right. And like the connection was just like so obvious to me, So I'm thinking it's like the gateway drug, start with the toaster, end up with the building, And so I was all excited about this idea and I posted it on social media and a friend of mine, Allie, owned a cafe at the time and she was like, why don't we have it in my cafe? And I was like, oh, I guess I'm really doing this, So,
it all sounds like it's kind of coming together, like everything's slotting in.
Yeah, it really did. And it was kind of like, well, I'm not really sure how this is all going to work. We were like, I guess we need a logo. I guess we need and we were the first one in Chicago, possibly in the Midwest. And so we really had no idea what we were doing. Right.
But that's quite exciting as well without a blueprint, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's usually the only reason people do things because once they realize like the potential downfalls, you know what I mean? Like they talk themselves out of it. And I thought I was going to have all of these contractor friends because I, do restoration work and stuff. And you just work with a lot of contractors and architects in this field. And, I was like, oh, I'll just rope a bunch of them in. And then I was like, oh, yeah, contractors don't do anything unless they're paid. Like, I don't know what I'm thinking, like having this volunteer initiative, right? But what was amazing was we got crazy amount of press right out of the gate because, again, we were the first ones to do it around here. And people just came. People just showed up. And none of the volunteers even knew each other. It wasn't like I was like begging my friends to come and help. People just showed up right from the beginning. They were just like, this sounds fun to like give up 3 hours on a Sunday and solve a bunch of problems. So it's kind of, it's been really easy just because of the volunteers and the retention. And the talent has been incredible. So yeah.
Thank you. Meg, how did you first hear about the workshops and how did you become a volunteer?
I'd seen it being passed around on Facebook and I was like, oh, that's really fascinating back in 2018. And I had 2 lamps that were from my grandparents' house and I was a little nervous about the wiring. I didn't want to plug them in and then they explode. And so I brought in the first lamp that I loved the most.
And it did explode. No,
it did not.
Just kidding.
Spoiler alert. Exploded.
But I brought it in and the one volunteer, Becky, said it was fine. I went away kind of disappointed.
Because I was the explosion.
I was hoping because I had my little like lamp rewiring kit with me and I was like, I really
wanted to have a go.
I wanted to see what it was like to take it apart. And so I was like, okay, well, I have another lamp. I'll be back. So next month I came back with my like white lamp in hand and I was like, okay, I'm ready. I know this cord is no good because it was all shredded. And I was like, it's time to replace it. And sure enough, as that one needed to be replaced, so they took my rewiring kit and they're walking me through how to do it. And as Becky's rewiring it, I think it was you, Carla, came out to me and said, hey, do you have any skills? And I was like, oh, I know how to sew. And you were like, great. You brought somebody to me. It was a woman who had her mother's silk robe that was probably 30 years old and had some tears in it. And the woman was like, can you help me repair this? And I was like, this is great. Yes. And so I'm just standing there like sewing the silk robe, learning how to rewire a lamp. And I ended up staying the rest of the time and repairing things,
amazing.
Sewing. And I got added to the list and I've been going back ever since. So that's
the deep end. Someone's mother's silk robe.
I know. I just came from breakfast before this with friends and my friend Kathy, she has a silk kimono and she's like, can I bring it to Community Glue? And I was like, yeah, Megan's got that. Like,
so ever since you've been going back, is it monthly?
Yeah. So, we're going on our 10th year, which is crazy. And I'll do some repairs and stuff, but like, I can't fix most of this stuff. Like, I'm good at so many things, but there's like so many things I don't know how to do. You know what I mean? And I don't have time or even inclination necessarily to do all of them. So, I'm like the organizer for this. And so it was 2018, Megan? Like,
yeah.
So that was like year 6. And I'm kind of like running out of steam. I'm also have like 37 jobs, I'm like a total hustler doing all these different things. And I remember, Megan, and it's very typical for me to just be like, oh, here you go. Here, I'll just put a tool in your hand. Now you're a repair. You know what I mean? Like, I gotta just get this done. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to love it. And they do, it's been really.
They don't have a choice by the sounds of it.
I know, really.
That's actually what I was going to ask next. I was going to ask how it's evolved over the last 9 years and also what the organisation actually entails.
Yeah, it's in terms of, how it's evolved. I mean, like, I was really tired, honestly. I think at that point, like, I was in kind of a lull myself. I just remember Megan having this like incredible smile and energy. It was like food for my soul. Like, you just kind of need sometimes like a new person to come in and have this new perspective and this new, that's what I think in large part has kept it going. Like, we got this kind of like new second wave, like turbocharge the first wave, back into their sort of enthusiasm around it. And, there were a lot of goals and they sort of changed. When Allie and I were doing this together, the first, maybe half of this initiative, we had all these ideas, all that we're going to open a tool library and we're going to start a revolution. You know what I mean? Like, it was really tons of ideas. And ultimately, it was like, we just really like how it is and how it's going. The volunteers are incredibly reliable. They're wonderful. We're all friends, at this point, and like, I really value them. I think they really value the experience. We help a lot of people. Everything's free for everybody. And I kind of like the scale of it. I feel like I can be a little overly ambitious in some areas of my life. And I kind of like that. Like, this just seems like the right size for what we're doing. People always want us to travel around the city, and occasionally we will go to, Chicago is a very large, sprawling city, and it's completely non-competitive. So I'm like, you start your own repair clinic on the south side or the west side or the whatever side, you know what I mean? We'll swap research, like whatever, that's fine. But like, if you want to maintain your volunteers, like, you have to make sure you're not overtaxing them or they don't feel, if people don't want to travel that far. Some people, they have young kids or they have this or that. And so I try to be like super respectful of everybody's time and what they want to do. So
once a month seems like doable, doesn't it? It's not too much.
Yeah, exactly. I want it to be fun. I want it to be a thing to look forward to for everybody, myself included, and so, so we were mostly a pretty local initiative. I don't know how it's evolved. I mean, it's hard, sometimes because you want to have a really hands-on experience with the people who come in. Initially, it was also like, we'll show people how to do everything in the way that like Megan has done that. And over time, I have to say, like, it's really kind of hard sometimes to focus and do repair work when someone is like, what are you doing now? So what are you doing now? So what are you doing now? You have to think, Yeah,
it's a different skill in itself, isn't it? Teaching.
Yeah. And every item we get in, it's like, people are always like, hey, can you fix this? I have no idea. Like, you have to bring it in. We have to open it up and see what's going on, And we have all kinds of workarounds. We won't have parts for certain things. So we'll, make parts out of other things and counterweights and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's like, it's incredible because we have people from like every walk of life, with like an editor, a subatomic physicist, like we've had like an engineer here and there. We've had like different people, but like people have different skills, from all different places and different sort of skill sets in terms of how they reason through things. So, but one of the things that definitely has been a goal that really has worked out so beautifully is the skill sharing aspect among the fixers, among the volunteers. Lovely. And you watch, again, totally non-competitive. Everybody is only there to fix another person's random item for free on a Sunday. You know what I mean? Like, so everybody's just kind of puts their brains together and helps each other in this really beautiful way. We bring our own tools, we bring our own supplies, whatever we get in the tip jar, I can replenish supplies with. And then, again, in terms of volunteer retention, it really helps if people like each other, and work well together. Turns out, I could never have predicted how that would have played out, but it played out really, really well.
That's so nice. So Meg, how do you prepare for the workshop?
Well, it kind of depends on the time of year. So I know back before the pandemic, when we were doing clinics during the winter, we would see a ton of puffy coats that just had the armpits completely blown out. Gone, because in Chicago, when you're holding onto the top train rail and it jerks, your whole sleeve is gone. Like you just got feathers everywhere.
So specific.
We would just see so many of them.
the train, haven't you? Like, how did you know?
So in the winter, you kind of bring supplies for that to patch those. In the summer, it's repairing a lot of bike seats, like where people are sitting on their bike in either their shorts or their trousers. And so you're patching a lot of the seats of trousers.
I always feel bad. I'm like, here's another ripped out crotch. Sorry,
Yay.
Megan.
I hope it's clean.
I know. We always tell people to launder in advance, but
So depending on the time of year will affect like what supplies we bring.
I hadn't even thought of that. That's so interesting.
Yeah. And just depending on what we're seeing a lot of lately, like past weekend, I brought a bunch of leather samples that I'd had that one of the other volunteers, Anne, gave me. And I was like, well, I'm just going to bring these in case. And I brought leather glue and leather needles. And we ended up having a ton of shoe repairs, which is not something that we typically have. But I had shoe glue and all that. And I was able to repair them. But you really can't predict, which is why you kind of had to bring a little of everything. I always bring.
Do you bring like a suitcase full of stuff?
I do. I have got like 2 huge bags of thread, all kinds of different swatches of fabrics. So I've got flannels, I've got regular cottons, I've got like not necessarily silks, but like some poly, definitely denims, always canvas. Now I'm bringing leather and some knits, like bamboo jerseys that can be really manipulated very well. And trying to be like, okay, what did I need last time and I didn't have?
Right.
Okay, I needed an extra seam ripper. Oh, I really wish I had my pinking shears. Or I needed neon thread for like 4 different projects that were all like hot pink or electric green. Okay, I need to bring that this time just in case. And everything I brought this last time, we ended up using most of it. And so I was like, okay, so maybe I do need to keep bringing leather glue and leather patches and repair shoes. Yeah. So you really can't tell, but I do try and keep the season in mind. Keep a lot of denim patches all the time.
All the time. How does the sewing area work? So presumably you've got a machine there.
So there's 4 of us in the sewing contingent. So it's myself, and I bring my baby Kenmore, which is my first sewing machine that my parents bought me. And so that travels with me. It's also the lightest, which is why I bring it, because I bring it on the train. We have Anne, who brings her grandmother's machine from the 20s.
Whoa.
So that machine is 100 years old and
Amazing.
is a workhorse. So Anne also is amazing at darning. And she has a darning ladle where she does weaving. She wove a scarf this past time for somebody who brought it in and had a ton of holes. So she fixed that. Michelle's kind of like our wild card fixer.
What does that mean?
One of the sessions over the summer, Michelle sewed the hem on someone's bath towel and then went out and put new windshield wipers on their car.
What a legend.
Which I love. So you're just so many talents. And then we have Alethea, who is really great at visible mending, just completely repatched this entire back pocket of one of our other fixers and made it look beautiful. So it's just kind of incredible. We all have these very different talents, but then when we get a project, Carla will come back and be like, hey, can you fix this? And the 4 of us will just be like, we'll just look at it and then we'll talk amongst ourselves and be like, well, I could do this, do this, do this, do this.
It's amazing.
I was going to ask, obviously you're having to think on your feet quite a lot, but it's nice that you have other people that you can bounce off of and say, how would you approach this? Because you can't go back and think about it for a week. You've got to just get on with it, haven't you?
It's got to happen like right now. And that's great because you are really thinking on your feet, but there are some things we immediately know, we can't fix that. For instance, people will bring us luggage.
Right.
It's really difficult to even hand sew, even with the strongest of thimbles to get through that fabric and multiple layers. We have a lot of people bring us zippers to be replaced in coats or in luggage. And I'm like, I'm very sorry with those things. You have to seam rip out the entire zipper and then put in a new. We only have 3 hours.
Yeah. And often the zip's like the first thing that went in pretty much, isn't it? In the construction of an item.
Right. So I'm like, there's a dry cleaner right down the street. They're really good. Can vouch for them. You should take this there.
Great.
That helps to streamline a little bit. But there are times when we'll have, for instance, in the summer when all the trousers are completely blown out, we're like, okay, how should I approach this patch? Should I visibly mend it? Should I do it with my machine? Considering how much wear is in this. And And so that's really refreshing to just have a hive mind all descend on one project and say, okay, this is what we need to do. Here's my thread. Here's your pinking shears. Here, I have a really strong needle. And it's just all resource sharing around the table. It's lovely. It
must be really fun not knowing what you're going to see each time as well.
It's an adventure. You're always like, I don't know what's going to land on my table today. Am I going to be darning something? Am I going to be patching something? And am I going to be gluing like leather onto something? You never know.
So what do you hope you're going to see?
Items that are clean. Before we implemented our please wash everything rule, I fixed a sweater. And as I'm fixing this sweater, this person said, oh, I bought that sweater at a thrift store 20 years ago. I've never washed it. And I was just like, oh, what am I touching? What is in this sweater? I was horrified. And so I finished the repair and I handed it back. I couldn't speak because I was so grossed out. I was like, I don't know. Why is this wool crunchy? Like,
no.
Yeah, we definitely try to be more emphatic about that now because it seems like a pretty basic thing. But like when you're just like a public initiative, anybody can walk in and do whatever, like that's the best part of it. But it's also like never really know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
So. But people are always so grateful, especially, I think you guys are the busiest because we'll have other things to do, but oftentimes it'll be like a microwave or something that someone will tinker with the entire time. Right. This one item. The sewists just like, they're like, bam, bam, bam. They get through it. And everybody is so excited to have that stuff repaired. It feels so good, Yeah. And it's great that there's
like garments. There's like a little problem with it. It's so annoying, isn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's like, in the fact that we can, as this like free service, you have people who can be like, all right, is this going to be an invisible mend, or is it going to be this like art piece, and depending, and I'm getting better at asking because I've shifted more towards like intake because of the way we've structured things during COVID. So I know now to ask more questions about what people want, do you want the fabric to match or do you want it to intentionally not match? Do you want this and that? Because I don't know much about sewing at all. And so like, where else are you get? Because like you can go to the dry cleaners here and be like, I would like a vibrant patch that is,
like it's some sashiko stitching.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to celebrate the scar of my garment. Like that's not going to fly. And plenty of people don't want that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of amazing.
It's so amazing.
So much stuff. I mean, it's crazy how much you guys get through.
So you've got the sewing department. What other departments have you got?
I can do like mechanical repairs, sort of basic mechanical repairs, and I do a lot of actual gluing of items.
Literally community gluing.
And it's like, I can do more things, but, sometimes there'll be like a lingering volunteer who doesn't have a whole lot to do. And of course, like people are actually want to do the work. It's not like you're there trying to get out of work. I mean, you're there because you want to like problem solve and figure out how to do this stuff. So, certain people are better with electronics. Other people are better with mechanical items. It just really runs the gamut of what we get in is so random a lot of it. I mean, lamps are the number one thing that we would probably have fixed over the year. Everybody's got a broken lamp, apparently. Everybody. Some people have 3. So
I would also say in the summertime, especially, we get a lot of fans.
Yeah.
A lot of like box fans, standing fans, doesn't matter. I think we just saw one last weekend. We saw another fan.
Yeah. Well, just the fan thing, this was like one thing I remembered witnessing. I think Ken did this, where it was a fan where one of the fins was like broken or something. And you're like, well, I can't really just glue it. Like, it wasn't like a thing like that. But what it mattered was like the balance so that the weight was equal around, everything to keep it going. So he like drilled into the end of the fin after breaking off the piece that was cracked and whatever, and just put like a little, like a screw or something that basically like was a counterweight so that it worked with this. I mean, like things like that, like our fixes they're creative.
That's
it's
cool.
like,
That's
this
so
is all
cool.
we have. This is like what we brought with us today. We don't have a permanent location that's like, so we bring what we've got and we use it. And that's part of what's fun about it, I think. But yeah, it's really hard to predict. Oh yeah. And so there was a woman who brought a fan in, and sometimes, a lot of these fans are just like so cheaply made, there's really just like not much you can do. I mean, we're pretty creative, but every now and again, you literally can't even get to the part. I mean, it's
I was going
planned
to say, like, how many
obsolescence.
times do you get an item that you just have to say, I'm so sorry, like this can't be fixed?
We do pretty well. I mean, we even fixed like a super soaker. Do you know what a super soaker is? Do you
What's
have those?
that?
It's like a water gun, like a plastic, super
Okay.
cheapy water. I remember like doing this big super soaker fix, like we can do a lot of things, but sometimes there is just a really specific part that we're just never going to have on hand. And in a case like that, though, we just tell people, like, we'll look up what is the part. Here's what you need to order. If you want to fix it, you can fix it yourself. If you want to bring it back once you get it, we'll fix it for you.
Brilliant.
So we diagnose.
Oh, that's so cool.
And, we can tell people. And sometimes we just declare a time of death. And like there are occasions where you're just like,
10:47.
This is a hazard. Yeah.
So Carla, I've heard of other repair cafes and workshops here and there. But where I live, the city that I am on the outskirts of, is actually a really kind of progressive and relatively sustainability-minded place in the UK. But there's nothing really regular in terms of repair cafes and what have you that's really stuck. So, I mean, why do you think that so many of these like well-meaning endeavours end up being short-lived? And what is the secret for making it last as long as yours has?
I really feel like we just got lucky with our volunteer pool.
Right.
I mean, there's 1,000% could not do this by myself, obviously. I mean, again, don't overtax your volunteers ever, listen, be respectful of everybody's needs, of their boundaries. If they say, I don't want, anyone bringing more jeans to me that have, what I mean, are torn in gross places, what I mean? Like, then you listen to that, do it, having them, but not having them so often that they feel like a burden.
So how do people hear about the workshops?
So again, in the beginning, we had a ton of press. So it used to be bonkers. We used to be so busy. I remember like sweat pouring down my temples, like running around trying to like facilitate, find the right fixer for the items. We'd have lines. It was kind of insane.
Wow.
And then it chilled out over time. So really at this point, it's mostly like social media. If I'm on my game, I'll get into like local newsletters, stuff like that. We have a designer who will design posters for free, who's a friend. And, we just use what resources we have. And I think because we've been around so long, word of mouth is really, it kind of does its own work, to a degree as well.
So what should people know if they wanted to set up a repair cafe?
It's been a while. It's funny. The pandemic has just made everything so...
what did you do in the pandemic?
So we didn't do them for a while, and because we had this. Well, also, the indoor space that we used pre-pandemic doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It was a temporary space anyway. It was a part of a building where they were going to tear things down. We were there for several years. Then they were going to tear everything down during the pandemic and stuff. So we knew we wouldn't have that space anyway. Normally, I would have been like hustling trying to find a new indoor space, but if everything was so weird, you couldn't go indoors anywhere. So Anne, the sewist Anne, works at a nonprofit that's nearby, and they had a big backyard. So she's like, why don't you do it in the backyard? And I mean, there were some times we had to like bundle up,
Oh, bless you.
It was one with like a heat lamp. Yeah, it got pretty chilly, but still people showed. We were also just like happy. Everyone wore a mask. We kept all the intake separate. I would do intake with another volunteer, Margie, usually, and we'd ask all the questions, take the item, and I would go and find the right, fixer, for the item. And whenever the item was done, I would call or text, depending on what they wanted the person to let them know to pick it up.
Yeah.
And it worked actually really, really well.
That sounds a really good structure.
Yeah. So I don't know what we're going to do next year. We haven't quite figured that out yet, but kind of open. It was neat to see it work so well in a different way. And we've always been pretty scrappy and adaptable. I mean, we've been in multiple spaces before, and because we bring our own stuff, but
it sounds like you're used to making things work, literally. So
yeah, pretty much, but things to keep in mind. I mean, you have to have enough tables, chairs, lighting is important. If you have dim light, you need good. I mean, if you're looking at tiny little screws, which we are often looking at the tiniest. Sure. I mean, these screws are like barely perceptible. I mean, they're like I don't even understand. How can any human, no human can see what this is, having the right tools. I also, one of my sort of side hustles was working with a tool company here for a while, finding groups that were doing really good work, and then basically being like, hey, why don't you pick a bunch of tools, so that you guys can continue doing this work, So paying attention to what we were using most often. And then at the time I was able to get like tool bags full of all of our most used tools to all of the volunteers.
Brilliant.
So, we have those kinds of things available now, like soldering irons and, things to test batteries and connectivity with electrical wires and just an assortment of things that we use pretty regularly. So, but yeah, so electricity, you have to have access to electricity. So it's just like practical space considerations. We really like a BYOB environment. So we like to somewhere that's not going to tell us that we can't have alcohol. If we want to have a beer while we're repairing something, we like that kind of casual atmosphere. And also, sometimes things do get a little fiery when we deal with heating elements and stuff like that. So you don't necessarily want to be in a space with shag carpeting or, so just thinking like practical. Sometimes you're just like, what's a space that we could use? And what's a space that's really fits how you guys like to run this event, and how can you do it safely, and how can you do it so you have good visibility and stuff.
So, Meg, let's talk a bit more about mending and repairs. So you were talking about how you were hosting mending parties for friends who claimed that they couldn't sew a button on. So that's so generous of you. Like, what motivated you to devote the time and energy to do that?
I think there's something so empowering about being able to fix your own things, to just sit down and say, I really love this garment. And instead of saying, oh, but it's unwearable because the hem is coming out, or this hook and eye is coming off this dress. Instead of doing that and being disappointed in your clothes, to be able to sit down and have the power and the knowledge to say, I can fix this, I can still wear it, I think is very important to me, to give people that power and that knowledge, and just keep spreading it as far as I can to as many people as I possibly can. I think there is just something so special about the way people light up when they are able to fix something on their own and can just rely on themselves. They don't have to take it to the dry cleaner to get a button fixed.
Yeah, or wait till they see their mother-in-law or something.
Right. I will say that I did end up sewing buttons onto garments for some coworkers at my job, because then they would buy me lunch. And I was like, well, this is lunch in downtown Chicago for sewing on 3 buttons. Yes. Okay. That seems like an even trade for me. Like,
very much. I'll do anything for food.
I know. I'm very easy that way. So for the most part, just watching my friends light up, especially when they bring like their pants that need to be hemmed. And I'm like, okay, so you just learned this stitch. This is what you're going to use on these trousers. Like, just flip it inside out. Pick a thread that matches as close as possible. And when they flip it over, when it's done and they can't see where their hem marks are, just the sheer pride in their faces. And that's really why I do it, just watching them light up.
I love that so much. So I really love that idea, though. And I was just thinking, like, what if more friendship groups or even workplaces could take your lead and have sort of like regular mending workshops? And I just think about how many garments that could be kept out of landfill or kept out of donation banks and kept into regular wear if everyone took your lead, and everyone who's got the time and energy, possibly. I think it's so fantastic.
I was going to say, I think also, like, even if it's not just a mending thing, one thing I did with Anne during the pandemic, and I was really isolated. I live alone. It was just me and my cat, like it was really
Mr. Nancy.
Mr. Nancy, the best. And Anne or I would, like, one of us would bike or walk over to the other person's house because we don't live too far. And, I would give her things that needed to be mended, usually darned socks. There was like a blanket that she wove some patches into that's like this like really meaningful blanket of that since I was like 1 year old, still use. And I would glue together broken things that she had. She's always breaking things. So like, it was nice because it wasn't like even limited to like a skill share. Like, we weren't necessarily sharing skills, but we were still like, it was like labor for labor in this way that was like no pressure at all. Whenever it gets done, it gets done. But I thought that was a really nice model of just being, hey, here's a thing I can do for you. What can you do for me? Like maybe we can help each other out.
I love that. Yeah, because everyone can do something or knows something, don't they, that can help you out. Like, for example, like my best friend, she cannot sew. I will mend something for her, and she will tell me what to do with Instagram.
Right. Totally. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a repair. It could be like, can you help me with my taxes? I will, like fix your lamp.
Write me the intro of a thing I need. Or
Yeah. It's a trade economy, man. That's where it's at.
How can we encourage that, though?
I try to post on Instagram when I'm doing mending because I want to I want to pull it out from behind the scenes to be like, this is what I'm working on, this is what I've mended. And if it is just darn socks, it's not exciting, but it's making it normalized to see.
No, that's so true.
Yeah.
So true.
It's really difficult. I work in a very, very corporate environment every day, but it's trying to move people towards a more sustainability mindset is difficult. But I recently got appointed to a couple of volunteer positions where I'm helping out very much in our Chicago office. And one of the things I would love to do is we have these huge workspaces. I would love someday to sit everybody down who wants to learn and teach them how to mend their clothes. Like,
yes.
In just a corporate environment, you have to, instead of wearing business suits all the time, I think the pandemic has really changed how a lot of people wear clothes and what they're wearing into the offices and downtown, to just have folks fix what they really love about their wardrobes and mend things. That's where I would love to go next, is
do it.
Instead of my apartment, like the workplace cafeteria. That would be my dream. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
And it's so true, isn't it? I think it's so right. You're like, you have to show people, oh, I'm mending this. No, it's not necessarily super fun. It's not as fun as like a brand new garment reveal on Instagram or something. But yeah, it's like, you've got to see it to be it as a way, haven't you? You've got to think like, yeah, this is part of sewing. This is part of owning clothing in general. Like it's keeping them going.
And I would actually say that in a lot of ways, like repairing is more excited than a new garment. Just in the terms of, maybe not if you're the one doing the sewing and you're like, oh, I made this whole new garment, but in terms of like the general population, we fix an object and people so often are like totally floored. They're just like, it is the resurrection, like that they are witnessing. It's insane. I mean, the littlest things, like I put a zipper pull back on a friend's jacket last month and she was like, oh my God. I mean, it was like the craziest thing she'd ever seen in her life. You know what I mean? Things like that.
YouTube.
Right. I know.
It's going to blow your mind.
But yeah. And so there's like modeling, and showing people these things can be done and they're not very hard. But then there's also, I mean, I really had a come to Jesus moment around like I said, initially, we also really had this idea of, oh, everyone's going to learn how to do stuff. And in some cases they do. And when you have small groups like the things Megan does, like that's perfect. But I also wanted to like capture all those other people who are just not especially curious, but maybe they're environmentally minded, or they just really like this thing because it's sentimental or whatever.
And it's keeping it out of landfill.
We'll fix it. We like fixing it. Like bring it to us. You don't have to be curious. I'm not going to judge it. I'm just going to be happy that you brought it instead of tossing it,
But you're right. As you were saying before, like not everybody can do everything. So for example, I wouldn't necessarily be interested in figuring out how my lamp works, but I'd love to fix your zip,
right. But the other thing too about having a repaired thing is like, if your friend repaired your lamp, like you're going to like that lamp has more meaning to you now. Like you've had a sort of like a more intimate sort of relationship. You're like, we went to the hospital together. Like we saw each other through some trauma. You got a second life. I didn't just toss you, or I didn't just donate you because I didn't want to deal with it. Yeah. Like creating connection between people and their objects. Like it can be some flimsy thing that's not worth anything, which we get all the time, I assure you. Just some like random again, sentimentality, But that thing afterwards, it has like a whole new meaning to this person. And some people will bring their objects back multiple times, which is not a reflection on our poor fixing, but sometimes like, they'll tear in new places or this thing will come on, you know what I mean? Like this wire connection will come out, separate again or whatever it is. And they keep bringing it back and it becomes this like thing, But I think that's also an interesting part of it, is creating connection that way.
So Carla, are there any individuals or organizations related to repair or sustainability in some way that inspire you and motivate you?
Oh, geez.
It's very broad. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of international travel with work. I remember being in Malaysia and just stumbling on people it was like everybody was just repairing everything, like out in the world, like it's such a normal part of life in a way that our like extremely capitalistic, ridiculous, like completely consumer driven economy right now, it discourages, I wanted to get away from repurposing being the main thing, because I feel like repurposing is like a cool thing to do here, where you're like, what am I trying to say? Upcycling. Yeah. So if you're upcycling, like I took this vacuum and I turned it into like a flower pot or something. And I'm like, yeah, I'm super not impressed by that because it's like,
it could have been a vacuum.
There's like a million pieces too that you've just completely disregarded.
And you still got to then buy a new vacuum.
Yeah. And I'm like, you know what else could be a flower pot? Like my cupped hand, like anything could be a stupid flower pot. You know what I mean? So I'm just like, we need to think about all of the components that go into our objects and stuff.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
I love sort of like when there's like a more multi-generational, aspect that comes in as well. I find that really lovely sort of skill sharing across decades that way. But consumerism is a real problem. We have to really take, more seriously all of the components.
But that's important.
Everything.
That approach is really important because there is so much greenwashing and people saying like, I've turned this vacuum into a plant pot. I am sustainable.
Yeah, I know. And I'm just like,
look a tiny bit closer.
Yeah, I recycle. Yeah. I'm like, it's super energy intensive. Like reuse is where it's at. So it's, repair and reuse, are really the best things we can do. So I don't know. Anytime I see someone like keeping the mission pure, I'm just like, woo, power,
Amazing. Thank you. So Meg, where do you get your mending inspiration and know-how?
A lot of folks on Instagram. I'll follow like the mending hashtag to follow a lot of folks. I also have a lot of books on mending. Zoe, I have your book on mending.
You could have written that book.
But I enjoy what other people have to say. Like I enjoy reading about the topic. I get a lot of books from the library on mending and different ways of stitching. I always want to be learning better ways of how to fix things. I really love taking classes. So we have the Chicago School of Shoemaking that I've taken some courses at, and I absolutely love it. So I'm able to work a little more leather into my repairs. It's amazing.
She's amazing. I interviewed her for something once, actually. The woman who started that shoemaking school. She's incredible. Total like back to the land movement in the 70s, like supported herself just making shoes.
Those classes are incredible. Highly recommend if anybody gets to come to the area to take them. But also just taking sewing classes in general and learning how things go together makes it much easier to mend. Like I took the Workroom Social Sew Your Own Jeans with Lauren Taylor, and that was great because it helped me learn more about how to work with denim in better ways. So then denim patches started appearing in almost all my repairs because I wasn't afraid anymore. That really helped. So kind of finding inspiration from all kinds of places, but always learning. It's incredibly important to just keep reading, keep learning, keep yourself sharp, just find out what else is out there.
I love that.
I just bought for 2022, I bought myself a journal, which I have probably 100 journals, but I wanted something really, really colorful. And I'm tracking all of my creative projects for 2022. But I also decided every month I want to try a new project. So punch needling, pattern making, I'd like to do drafting. So I want to start really pushing myself to learn more.
Cool.
So that's kind of 2022 goals.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, this has been so good. Thank you both so much. Thank you so much for sharing everything that you shared with me. And I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was delightful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zoe.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!